Welcome to Garden Gossip, Big Blend Radio's home and garden show. Come on, let's grow together. Welcome, everyone. Today we are going digging. Truly, we have Pam Penick joining us. She is a nationally recognized gardening expert. She's a garden writer, an advocate for climate resilient design, which we love. Because honestly, as Nancy and I travel the country, we're seeing all the climate change things happen. And not time zones are changing, but the microclimates seem to be changing in places. Even when we were in a standstill place, we used to live in Tucson and Joshua Tree area. And we saw how things were changing over time. So I'm really excited to hear from her today because her new book is out now through Timber Press, which is an awesome. If you're going to get a gardening book, go to Timber Press. They're awesome. Go to Gardens of Texas is the title, and you're going to go want it now. And while you're doing that, you're going to want to also, if you have not been to her website, go to penick.net, and that's Penick, penick.net/digging. Her blog is super cool. I got stuck in there. I'm stuck in her book, and the book is drop dead gorgeous. And I think you did such an awesome job on showcasing all the different regions of Texas. And Texas is massive, but showing the beauty of native plants. So I bow down. Thank you for that. You did such an awesome job. So welcome, Pam.
So thank you. Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here on your show. I appreciate it so much. And I am really happy to be here on publication day at last.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
It's like, welcome, right? It's the day, the day. We want cake. Cake everywhere, right?
Where is it? Yeah.
Okay, wait. So if you're going to celebrate with what would be your favorite treat? Okay, like as a picnic, and what garden in Texas? We got to keep it Texan today.
Oh my gosh.
Would you want to go? And if you, because this is true garden gossip. If you could take over someone's garden for a weekend getaway, it just went from a picnic to a weekend, but we want to know food.
Yeah.
We want to know what you want to drink, and whose garden do you want to garden sit?
That's a hard one. That's like on the verge of saying, what is my favorite garden, which is one of those dangerous questions. But I can say with certainty that carrot cake is the way to go there.
I knew I liked you for a reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carrot cake. And gotta have that cream cheese frosting and a little glass of champagne to go with it, maybe. Yeah.
Yes.
This is what I mean, gosh, there are so many gardens I could take over. But you can. Yeah, I'm going to shout out one in particular. This is my friend Linda Peterson's garden in San Antonio, which is in the book. And when I was writing this book, I knew from the start there were certain gardens that I had in mind that I wanted to showcase. And hers was one of those. I've admired her garden for many years. She's got this just amazing, sparkly, silvery, beautiful gravel garden. And then within this wall, under these amazing live oaks, she has this beautiful hammock and patio and outdoor fireplace. You could just sit back there with your carrot cake and your champagne and have a good little celebration. So that's what
I want to come hang out.
You absolutely can. Yeah.
Now, okay. So the thing is, I think that in your book, you've created living spaces. That's something that is important. And when we talk about native plants and doing things that we're working according to lack of water, too much water, or potential flooding out of nowhere, freezes. Remember that big, well, you're in Austin, that big freeze. And we were in the hill country that March out in Medina area and Bandera was where we were. And we went hiking in Los Maples State Park.
Yeah.
And another state park. We found like a few state parks around there. And little wildflowers were popping up, trying. And I thought, that's some resiliency right there. Right. After that huge freeze, everyone's like, well, our wildflower season's not going to happen. The bonnets aren't coming out. And I saw these little bits of wildflower coming out. And I thought, well, celebrate what's here.
Yeah. I mean, that is amazing. And that's one of the things I like to point out with this book. I mean, I was writing it on the heels of some really what felt like serious climate disasters when you were living through it. There was the massive freeze that made national news that, down in Austin, we got down to 5 degrees and we were without power for, like 3 or 4 or 5 days, just depending on where you were. And the garden was under 6.5 inches of snow, which we do not get that here. That is just unheard of. And so it was pretty astonishing. It felt pretty epic and destructive. And when the snow melted, parts of my garden looked like a fire had gone through. They were just what would have been evergreen. It was just brown. And those plants did die all the way to the roots. But there were other parts of my garden that stayed green because maybe they were more heavily native. And that really taught me a lesson. And then the parts even that had kind of burned to the ground, to the underground roots, they were still alive. And, a few months later, greenery was coming up. Plants do want to live. And if you choose the right plants, it can be far more resilient than you think when you live through one of these kind of crazy weather events. And that really was a lesson that I took home from living through that one and then an ice storm that happened the next year. The garden wants to live. And you can help it along by choosing the right plants, leaning more native, and starting to adapt your garden to, hey, maybe we're going to get these epic freezes now. Maybe we didn't used to, but the polar vortex is doing some weird things and we've got to adapt to that. And those kind of questions were what I wanted to ask these garden makers across the state, because they were the questions that I had about my own garden.
Now, have they been seeing the changes too? Because even as we travel back and forth across the country, we've been to places like Asheville that are never supposed to have a hurricane. And,
Right.
But then talk about resilience. This spring was just gorgeous. Like you wouldn't have known depending on where you were going. We were in Oregon, out in Eugene, and a friend of ours there has this beautiful garden. We were there during an ice storm. In fact, they couldn't get home. We couldn't get out. And I'm looking at her garden and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's iced over.
Yeah.
And she had a really good attitude. I started buying her all these bulbs. I'm like, you need to have these bulbs. Just I feel bad. Like your garden. It was like a year and a half later, we go there and her garden is beyond thriving. Like, so I think gardens teach us resilience, but also there is having the right plant for the right change. And like you're saying, the natives, and I think it is the gardeners who are out there all the time that can see that change. So in Texas, out of everyone you're interviewing and putting in the book, and you're giving us good gossip because we get to see their gardens, which are beautiful. Are they seeing that change happen everywhere?
Every single person, right? So I didn't necessarily choose each garden based on it being as, looking at everything through an environmental lens. I mean, obviously as gardeners, we do that, but I wasn't necessarily choosing people who were activists in that way. I was just choosing people that I saw as successful gardeners and people who had beautiful gardens and were doing things with an interesting story. Like I wanted to know the story of their garden, what they got out of it, why they got into it, what changes they were seeing. And that was the most fascinating thing for me, because then it's more than just pretty pictures, right? And I mean, I love eye candy as much as anybody. And I feel like I delivered some eye candy here.
Yes, you did.
Working with my photographer, I'm going to shout out Kenny Braun there because he did amazing job with the photos. But beyond that, you get the reality of these gardens and you learn that they're not just picture perfect, frozen things like a living room. I mean, these are living ecosystems that people have created. They change, things die. That's part of the process. It's never about some end result that you just get to like put on your shelf and admire. That's not what gardening is. And anyone who gardens knows that. It's transitory, it's ephemeral. And that's part of the beauty of it and part of the joy of it. And so I hope that comes through in the stories. And what I also hope is that people who read it take away this idea that it is a process. It's not about trying to live up to some picture perfect garden. These are real people and they have their low moments just like anybody else, just like anybody who gardens, and they've lost plants and things have happened that they wish didn't happen, but they've picked themselves up and they've kept on going. And, we captured it at a moment in time. And, but the reality is you're going to have highs and lows in your garden. And it's still going to bring you joy if you recognize that it's about the process. It's about seeing the wildlife that you can provide a habitat for, which was a theme among so many of these gardens.
Yes, that's another thing I love. With a National Wildlife Federation, the certified wildlife habitat, gardening for wildlife is something I really love because it's true. And I think when we understand that a garden is part of the web of life, then there is more resiliency, right? with that.
Yeah. Well, it motivates you to keep going even when you have things that die or whatever, because you see how much of a difference it makes. You see the insect life that is drawn to it when nothing else is out there that's blooming, and you've got a plant that's bringing them, a source of food or shelter. That's pretty. I mean, maybe it sounds corny, but I think was the common denominator among all of the gardeners, how much they love seeing that wildlife that's drawn to the garden, whether it's birds or insects or any other creatures.
Hummingbird moths. Yeah.
Hummingbird moths and hummingbirds and bobcats. One guy had a bobcat that had come to his garden. I mean, it's amazing what you can see.
It is amazing. We were just in Greenville, Texas, and I was thinking of you on this. And Greenville was the capital of cotton in Texas and the South at one point. Then the boll weevil came and took out what was happening with the cotton, and it went to West Texas. And so we were driving around, and they have this black land soil, and you talked about that in the book. And the lady was talking, and they have a beautiful garden downtown that the master gardeners keep up. And when I went in there, it was just this little paradise in the downtown that you wouldn't think of this hard black soil that is like black clay. I'm used to red clay living in Africa. I'm used to that. But this is like a whole other animal.
Gumbo.
It is. And it's like crazy. But then they had and I can't remember the name of the plant, but it's like a giant hibiscus, but it's not a hibiscus, and it's related to cotton. I can't remember the name, but it was there, and I'm like, okay, so this does still grow here. But when this garden, they put a water fountain, they had some shade trees, and they had native plants, and I was surrounded by butterflies. Just like it was like, all right, I could just sit here with my champagne all day long. Thank you very much. So it just showed this example of, even with agriculture going on, this beauty that can happen. And I was thinking of that, of how did they do it in that soil? Because that is hardcore. I mean, I've done desert gardening, but that to me.
Well, you got to choose the right plants. And so that's prairie soil, right? I mean, and so people with that black gumbo and with Austin soil, half of our town on the east side is pretty much the gumbo clay.
Yeah.
And then on the west side of town, it's more rocky caliche. So they both have their challenges, and, plants that thrive on one side of town may not thrive as well on the other side of town. So it's helpful to know what kind of soil you have always, but you choose the right plants and they want to grow in it, and that part of Texas, where the black gumbo was prairie at one time. And so you can plant your prairie plants, your pollinator plants that, your grasses, and those are going to thrive because they're made for that kind of soil.
And they have deep roots compared to what I thought. I did not realize how deep those roots go down.
The prairie plants? Oh, it's amazing when you see cross sections. Some gardens will have that. And you see how deep, the plant itself may be, 2 feet tall, but the roots go down like 6 or 8 feet or 10 feet deep.
It's crazy.
They're seeking out the water. Yeah.
It's crazy cool. The one thing too in your book, I noticed that there was a section talking about crevice gardens. Can you tell people about that? What that?
So that was Colson Bruce's garden. He lives here in Austin, which is where I live. And he created that garden during COVID. He, had time at home, and he looked out and he saw a dead lawn, and he was like, I can do better than this. But he was not a gardener. Luckily, he had a neighbor around the corner who was a gardener, so helped him with plant selection. But he was from a sculpture background, and he had also lived in the Mojave Desert. So he was really drawn to the idea of a rock garden, and he kind of latched onto the idea of a crevice garden, which in all your travels, you've probably been up in Colorado and seen. They do amazing crevice gardens up there, but they're using alpine plants because they're up in the mountains. And that's kind of where that style of gardening really took off, was with alpine plants. So he knew that alpine plants, or, his friend also worked with him on the plant selection, and they knew that alpine plants were not going to thrive here in Texas. So Colson started thinking about the kind of plants that thrived in the desert. Well, we're not desert here either. So he got the desert look, but using plants that would thrive right here in Central Texas. And used his sculpture background, his idea of how stone should fit together to create this amazing crevice garden. He moved those stones himself. He talked about how he, you know, got those positioned using, he had the truck, his truck and his wife's truck, like pointing the headlights at it in the middle of the night because he was so obsessed that he was like still trying to get these stones in place after dark. I mean, most of us have probably gardened by like a headlamp. He was doing it with the truck lights. And then got it planted up. And then just like a few months after it was all planted, we had that what we call snowpocalypse event here in Texas, the deep freeze, down to 5 degrees. And it really tested his plants. And sure, he lost a few, but he said he was amazed by how many of those plants did make it, partly because they were in a crevice garden, which the rocks provide a little shelter for the roots. The roots can slip into those crevices and it keeps them cool in the summer, and the rock gives them a little warmth in the wintertime. It's like a little microclimate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just another example of the creative gardening that's going on. And I think his example, because his was the first crevice garden I'd ever seen in Texas, and I'd seen lots of them in Colorado, but that was the first one here. I have since heard about several other people who are working on crevice gardens. I think that's going to inspire people to do something a little out of the ordinary with plants that will appreciate that.
I actually have a friend, a musician friend years ago in San Diego, and his wife created this wall garden. Like it just had one terrace after the other, like mini, all the way up the fence kind of thing. It was crazy what she did.
Wow.
Like, and different designs and swirlies here and this. I was like, she made like a miniature plant village is how I can say it. And it was all, San Diego was pretty an easy gardening area. And it was like succulents and all kinds of things. But it's how the rocks, I've never seen anything that
it's garden artistry, right?
Yeah.
And you know it when you see it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was like, what? You're just spending a whole bunch of time. Now, you're talking about all the different temperatures and that Austin is not desert, but you have desert plants. And on a show recently with our friend Terry Guthrie, she lives in Dallas and she is a travel writer. She was covering the Arboretum's fall event with all the pumpkin villages and everything, the Dallas Arboretum. And I was talking about, I really want to go to that Arboretum. It's been on my list for a while. So is Houston's botanical garden, in any garden, and your Ladybird Johnson is definitely on the list. But I was talking to her on the show because we've been to and as people know, we pet sit as we travel and taken care of numerous gardens in Dallas. And I said, the plants in Dallas are cool, but it's like a desert. And afterwards she's like, Lisa, we're not a desert. I'm like, I know, but you have desert plants. I've seen red yuccas and this and all these different plants that we grew in Tucson. Yet Tucson is definitely a desert, but the humidity was similar. She goes, yeah, but we have hailstorms and we have ice. And I'm like, I know your ice. I've driven your ice. I don't need to do it again, but I have. But to me, it's interesting because you do have cactus growing. You do have these desert plants, but you're not desert. What are you? What is that? What are you, Dallas? Like,
we're asking this all the time. I know. Well, so like we get 33 inches of rain in an average year, which never happens anymore because right now we're in a terrible drought. But that is our rainfall average, which I think is the same as Seattle. So if you were to compare Seattle and Austin or Dallas, they probably couldn't be more different in many ways as far as the plant palette, as far as what will survive, because the rainfall only tells a small portion of the story. So what we are is, we're subtropical. We get the moisture that comes in off the Gulf and gives us the sweat, nasty humidity all summer. And that keeps a lot of desert plants from thriving here. We do have some, as you point out. We have those red yuccas. Those are native right here in Central Texas. They're wonderful plants. They're super tough. We can grow some agaves if they are cold tolerant, because we do get down below freezing regularly. We don't get super cold unless you count that one crazy year where we had all the snow and 5 degrees. But normally we would get down into like the mid-20s would be typical. It doesn't usually stay below freezing for more than a day or so. So that's the kind of climate that we're in. And then as far as the heat, it'll be 100 degrees for 3 months. So, and then at night it won't cool off until it'll be like 78 when you wake up in the morning and humid. So it's a challenging climate, and it's really hot. It can be really a long time without rain, and then when the rain comes, it's just like flood, 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 flood. Um, that means gardeners have to be adaptable to that. You have to plant the plants that want to grow here. You might want to experiment, and I always encourage, like, if people want to experiment, go for it. But if you're tired of throwing away money on plants that won't make it, and you're not the experimenter, and you've got a limited budget, then plant the plants that you know are tried and true. And
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to find a list of those plants. Now, that's not to say that a certain plant maybe would grow for you. It all depends on your circumstances, your soil, your light levels and stuff, and that's part of the experimentation that gardening is. But yeah, I mean, like, rely on those lists of hardy native plants, adapted plants too that are really well suited for our area, and then you'll have that base layer to succeed with. And if you want to play around after that, you can, with knowing that you're not going to lose your whole garden if it gets down to some crazy freeze again. That's
Yeah.
just kind of common sense. And I love
Yeah.
that so many of the gardeners were sharing that kind of common sense approach. Like, let's have those tried and trues so that you don't have to lose your whole garden and start over.
That's what potted plants are for.
There you
You can
go.
wheel them in. Yeah, wheel them in,
Yeah,
cover them up, or,
absolutely.
or get your annuals, that they're going to come and go. And when you do lose plants, it is sad because
Yeah.
they are family, but it does give you an excuse to get more.
It does give you an excuse to get more. Yeah, it sure does. Open
That's
up
the
those
fun part.
halls, and yeah,
Yeah.
keeps the nurseries in business.
That's something I wanted to touch on because I think it's very important about where you get your plants, because sometimes you'll go in a big box store and everyone thinks this is going to grow here, just because if it's like when we were in 29 Palms outside Joshua Tree National Park, you could see Joshua Tree from our house, and you go to the box store versus the local nursery. There was a night and day difference in experience because they were they were carrying plants for the desert, and right down the hill was Palm Springs. So they had the same plants in Palm Springs as they were giving us in the Mojave Desert versus the Colorado Desert, right?
Oh, wow.
And one's moist and tropical feeling, and we're up where we get to 120 plus days, and in winter can have a freeze and snow and all of that. So they would just kind of put that this was a desert plant and it grows in all deserts, and that is not true.
Yeah.
So
It's
that was
important to get that local advice, right? The
the
local
nurseries.
local nurseries who know what plants are going to thrive in that region. Because the box stores are often just carrying like a small selection of plants that they think are gonna just sell well everywhere. And so for so many of us who are gardening in the Southwest or regions that are drier, we don't see our kind of gardens always represented in books or magazines or online or websites or any of the places where you would see gardens. And so you start to get an idea of what your gardens should look like in your region that may have zero relevance to what will actually grow out there. And so,
This is why we have Garden Texas.
That's right. I know. Or
Gardens of
whatever.
Texas here.
Yeah.
Everyone go get it. Go get the book. This is going to help you.
And talk to your local nursery people, because they know, they're on the ground growing the kind of plants that will succeed for you wherever you are. Because like even within Texas, the range of climate is enormous, from 40 to 50 inches of rain on the southeast side to 15 inches of rain on the west side. You're not going to grow the same plants even across the state of Texas. So definitely you want to get into your local nurseries, find plant people, talk to your neighbors who have plants. They'll often give you extras or give you seeds. That's the way you can really get plants that are going to thrive where you live.
Ooh, the whole seed thing is exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's like you could get a strong plant and save it, and also to get plants that are like native plants, right? And to be able to keep propagating them. But I also feel that even for vegetable gardens and things, that we've forgotten what heirloom plants and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
there are different colored carrots.
There's so much variety that we just don't know about or forget about. And luckily there are a lot of people out there who are working to preserve these heirloom plants. And you can Google and see if there's like a seed swap in your city. There are definitely seed swap organizations here in Austin. So that can be a great source of free plants, and
Now, I know
diversity.
you love national parks and state parks and parks too, like we do.
Yeah.
And some of them, I remember once writing an article going, oh, I want to do gardens across. We were doing this whole map. In fact, it still needs to be finished because then I started going into all the parks and I'm like, well, they have these homes from back in the day and this was their plant. There were gardens at lighthouses. And then I started going crazy down a rabbit hole, like stupid crazy. And it's incredible, but I believe going to parks can also teach you about what you can have as a native plant because they're not going out there and watering the entire park, right?
Right.
So those plants are truly the resilient ones. Like we had Saguaro National Park in our backyard in Tucson. I think we always live next to a national park or a park. Actually everywhere I think about, we did. So it's from there, I always go, that is like your truest form in a way.
Yeah, Mother Nature as a garden, right? Like, I mean, all of our plants that we grow in gardens came from somewhere out there. They either came from our, what's growing out around us that you could go take a hike and you could see those plants. Or if you're not growing so many native plants, then they came from somebody else's native selection of plants, maybe across the ocean. It's not like they just came from stores, right? They were selected because somebody saw them in the wild and thought, that's a beautiful plant. I would love to grow that in my garden. And that kind of plant collection is what led to all the plants that are now available for purchase in nurseries. So yeah, it is funny to think about it that way, but you can definitely go on a hike and go to your national park and see what plants you love, see what plants are thriving in your own area. It gives you a sense of your own natural landscape. And it's nice to tie that in with your own backyard. It doesn't have to look like a wild area, but it can have that connection.
Well, it's interesting to me. And also a lot of nature conservancy parks and public lands, or some of them are open at certain times, have like plant sales. Some of them actually have their own greenhouses. I've been to parks with their own greenhouses and I'm like, now this is cool.
That is cool.
That is, there are some just different things. And I think botanical gardens do a good job of having plant sales and all those kinds of things too.
I see that more and more here too. Yeah. The Wildflower Center here in Austin definitely has plant sales in the spring and the fall where you can go get a selection of native plants that maybe you've never tried before.
Ooh, cool. And they give you knowledge as well. That's the other thing, all those events. West Texas, we need to touch on because this is like a whole other animal. It's interesting coming from Tucson. You come through, you go through El Paso, it's already changed. Like it's changed. You go through the Dragoon Mountains, El Paso is different. And here we start hitting the Chihuahuan Desert. And then you got Big Bend National Park, Big Bend State Park. You got Guadalupe National Park, Mountain National Park, which is now 4 seasons of, it's like a mountain. It is a mountain. Yeah. So that's different, right?
It is totally different. Yeah.
Way different. But then West Texas, you've got like ocotillos and just all the beautiful cactus and and so a lot of people, I bring this up because they look at desert and they do not realize how much a desert has as an ecosystem and how beautiful desert gardens are. There's a magical quality to them.
That surprised me too. I didn't really know West Texas at all when I started out. I had gone to Big Bend years ago and was out there during our last epic drought, which was like around 2011. And what I remembered about Big Bend at that time was driving around the daytime, I noticed that even the cactuses were dying. Like it was so dry that even they were suffering. I didn't really discover the magic of the desert at that time. My eyes weren't open to it. And then for writing this book, so I was shooting the gardens in 2023 and visiting the gardens out in West Texas. Suddenly I got it. The vastness of the space out there, the sky, the mountains on the horizon. The light is different out there because they don't have the Gulf humidity. It doesn't get that far. They have a drier air, like the Southwest. And so the quality of the light is different. And they're doing amazing gardening out there. I mean, I was really bowled over by the plants that they could grow. Like you said, those ocotillo, the yuccas, the grassland. It's desert grassland. And so you don't necessarily think of grasses and grassland as being a desert, but it is. The Chihuahuan Desert is maybe one of the wetter deserts. And the variety of plants they can grow is just amazing. And what one of the gardeners, I think Jim Martinez, pointed out to me He said, like, when you're cruising through that area at 65 miles an hour, you might look out the window and think there's just nothing out here because you're seeing this desert grassland, you're seeing the mountains in the distance. But he said, if you stop and you're walking into it, that's when you see just how much life is there. There are all these different grasses, there are all these forbs, these flowering plants coming up in the grasses. There are native cactus species, and there's all this wildlife that depends on those plants and that's drawn to it. So there is a lot to be said for, as you say, stopping at the parks, getting out of the car, taking a walk on the trails, really looking around and not thinking that you know what a place is from what you can see on the highway as you cruise through it to the next service station,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have to get out and look.
Yeah, and the desert has ground covers, and people would never realize that. They have
Yeah.
little bitty flowers, or like the powder puffs, that are just
Yes.
amazing, and
Yeah.
trees like the mimosa trees. Oh my gosh.
What the plants do to survive in a harsh landscape can make them beautiful. And that was the lesson I took about when talking to all the gardeners across Texas too, because Texas is a harsh place to garden, is those constraints can end up making your garden more beautiful than if you could have planted whatever you wanted and known that it was going to live. Those constraints make you create a garden that is of its place, that fits here, and that reflects your own story as well as the story of the your landscape. Yeah, the land.
Really appreciate gardeners on the natural level of things, because the less garden we have, the bigger dead zones we have on land. We talk about dead zones in the water from oil spills and harmful algal blooms and everything like that. Those are not the flowers we want. But gardens clean the soil, trees clean our air, and make it a habitat for humans and for birds, for, raccoons, we love them, and fox, and all those great critters we want to see.
Yeah.
So gardeners are making things come back to life, right? As we,
Yes.
as we put in another housing development and some of that land is disturbed, right? We know a lot, it does. Then we have to go in, and as gardeners, we need to nurture, because the soil changes. And so I wanted to touch on that. I mean, you're living in Austin, which is like Asheville, North Carolina, is just exploding in growth, right? But there's this balance of, all right, if we're going to have these developments, we need to take care of the soil. Is that something that you heard from the different gardeners you talked to?
Yeah, I love that you're pointing that out, because I do think there's a role in terms of how we see ourselves as people who plant plants. And I don't even think you need to think of yourself as a gardener. I know I myself not rejected. I just didn't think of myself as a gardener for many years when I was a new homeowner, and I just thought, I'm just putting some plants in. This is my landscape. That matters too. And you can choose the things that you plant. And plants do have amazing healing properties. I mean, they can be used to clean brownfield sites. I saw that in Denver when I was up there this summer. There was an old brownfield site that they've turned into a wildlife refuge, and it was reclaimed through the use of plants. Like, it cleaned the soil. Several of the gardens featured in the book, especially in the east part of the state, featured ponds that were being kept clean through biofiltration. And that just means the water was flowing through plant roots and over rocks, and that was creating the bacteria that eat all the algae, and it just keeps the water clean. I mean, think about that. That's
how our Native Americans did that.
That's how streams work, right?
That's it.
Yeah. So we have all these tools. They're really simple tools when you think about it. They're the plants that grow here, that want to live here. And if we can, you can do it scientifically or not, but everything that you are planting in the ground can have this kind of impact. Which, I mean, think about what a gift that is for us to be able to choose a plant and know that we're doing good in so many ways. We're doing good in what's in the soil. We're doing good with the creatures that need those plants. It is inspiring. There's a lot of power in that.
Well, I also want to say, like, birds and migratory animals, right? They come back to that same spot year after year, generation after generation after generation.
Yeah.
And then something goes away, but their DNA is still sending them to the same place. And then they land there, and there's no water anymore. There's no trees.
Where did everything go? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, paradise, put up a parking lot, right? So gardeners are putting the paradise back in.
Yes.
And still manage to have that coexistence, which is, to me, wonderful. And that's what I think is that power. And then learning about your soils and cleaning that soil. Like I love what you're talking about with the streams. East Texas is swampy, man. There's some swampy spots out there and some gators, depending on where you go.
There's gators even in Dallas. Yeah, there's gators all over the state.
Orchids. I mean, like big thicket area. You got all kinds of
a huge state, right? I mean, it's an amazingly vast
and some
state,
of the best bird watching in the state. I mean,
that's
country.
Absolutely true. Yeah, South Texas
really is.
Yeah,
and you've got coastline. I mean, that's the other thing. You've got like coastal gardens.
Yeah, there are. Really, pretty much any kind of garden you might want to see. There are areas of Texas that would have it, and but you just got to do some driving to get to it all because it is so big. That's the thing.
It's a road trip.
Well, you and I like that.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So, I do want to ask you this too, with all the people you met with. Did they keep garden journals? Like, because I think that's got to be so important to, even like, oh, this bird came back, or, did they keep journals of their garden?
Wish I had thought to ask that. I didn't specifically, but I know that some of them do have garden journals if you count like blogs or Instagram, which I definitely think of as a form of journaling since I'm a longtime blogger myself. Like Michael McDowell, Plano Prairie Garden at Plano, Texas, his garden is featured, and he had a blog for many years called Plano Prairie Garden, and now he primarily posts on his Instagram, but that's a form of journaling. He is showing what's changing over time. He's keeping records for himself. I'm sure that many of the gardeners are doing those kind of records. One of the gardeners in West Texas told me that he was using the Merlin app on a regular. He was the first one who told me about the Merlin app for bird watching.
Yeah.
And I think you can keep track of the birds that you've seen that way. So there are a lot of maybe newfangled ways to think about journaling. And I just have a feeling that most of these gardeners are probably keeping track of in some shape or form, because that is part of the pleasure of it is thinking about, well, just knowing what you're growing. Like a lot of people like to know what their plants are, and our brains can only hold so much. So we have to have plant lists. And I always tell people, take pictures. Like when you're starting a garden, it's so easy to look back after a couple years and be like, oh, that's really pretty. But you forget what it looked like when you started and how it was just a bare nothing. It's really fun to have those photos. You just go back on your phone and you can look and see, oh, wow, I've come so far. Like, look how much has grown since then. It's
exciting.
Yeah.
It is exciting, and you'll have more bird life and insects and butterflies and bats and even night gardens. Now, night gardens were something we got into as well. Is like doing we could grow datura and things. I saw datura and green.
Yeah. It's a pretty widespread native plant. I love it. Yeah.
Oh, it smells so good.
And you get the sphinx moths.
Did you ever think you were going to write 3 books and have gardening as, this huge life?
No, I don't think I thought that at any time. I was an English major and came out of school and did work for different publications. I worked for some magazines when I lived in North Carolina, and then moved to Texas in my mid-20s and worked for a business press. And then I decided to stay home and raise kids for a few years. I was out of the professional world. And that was when I started gardening. My mom gardened, her mom gardened, but I had never thought of myself as a gardener until I had a little time, and the kids were down for a nap and I wanted to make the yard look prettier and started gardening. And then it became a passion. Like I just fell in love with it. And I really loved the design idea of it. And so I was taking classes wherever I could, reading all the books I could get my hands on about gardening, and specifically about Texas gardening, because it is challenging here, and most of the just general gardening books just don't work for where we are. Luckily, the Wildflower Center had classes on native plant design, so I really got into native plants because of that botanical garden, and just took all that knowledge and kind of turned it into a design career. I started blogging around 2006 and then kind of hung out my shingle as like, here, I'll help you design your yard with native plants. And it took off, and people were interested in converting their thirsty lawns into native plant gardens.
Awesome.
And so, I did that for a number of years. And then that led to the book writing, and here we are with this brand new book. So I couldn't be more excited with how it turned out.
Gardens of Texas, y'all. I can say y'all, right?
You absolutely can. You're everybody can use y'all. Yeah.
We're in Lubbock, and hey, they grow grapes for wine in Texas, and wine in Texas is mighty fine. So I'm just saying.
There we go.
Well, congratulations. We can't wait for everyone to listen and watch and go get the book and start gardening. And even if you are not in Texas, it's worth looking and getting that inspiration because, you know, it really, if you're on the sidelines, on the state line, get it.
Get it, absolutely, and one of the things I tried to do for any reader anywhere was at the end of each garden was to pull a design lesson or, some how-to that people could apply to their own home no matter where they live, so
and the stories, like you're telling, it's still gardener stories, and it's personal. Gardens are personal, you know?
Yeah, anybody who gardens will relate to the stories these gardeners are telling because they're telling a love of the land, a love of being in nature, a feeling of doing something good in the world and getting their hands dirty, and we all relate to that.
Yeah, now I want to go outside and water some plants.
Uh-huh.
But they had rain yesterday, so I'm not allowed. All right.
Oh, man.
I know. Well, thanks so much.
Send that rain here. Yeah, thanks,
yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, Lubbock got a little bit. Everyone, again, it's penick.net. It's PENICK.net. And when you're there, go to her blog, Digging. I mean, that's just like perfect, right? And listen, dirt under your fingernails, Catherine Hepburn would love that, is one of the best things on earth. And I think getting your kids involved in gardens are amazing as well. And don't forget, you can also get her other books, Lawn Gone with an exclamation point. And the other one is The Water Saving Garden. So check it all out. Gardens of Texas is out now again through Timber Press. Thank you all. And go get some garden gossip out there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being on the show.
Thank you for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Garden Gossip Show. Thanks for growing with us. You can follow us at bigblendradio.com.